Welcome to the C3 podcast. C3 stands for Compassion, Community, and Commitment. And we're here to bring you the stories of those in our community living out these values and making an impact for the kingdom. And now, let's get started.
I want to welcome everyone to the C3 podcast. I'm your host today, Pastor Conan Stevens, and sitting with a friend of mine, Jonathan McCombs. Jonathan, honored to have you on here today.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and here's what's cool, Jonathan. So this is the very first one. I realize many are listening, but this is the first one you could actually watch because we are filming it. So I've always thought I had a great face for radio, but now this is scary because here we are going broadcast with our faces too. So a little bit scary, scary.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. So let's do this. We want to just jump right into your story and maybe just kind of, again, set the groundwork by sharing your upbringing. What'd that look like, your childhood?
So I was born in upstate South Carolina in a town called Anderson, right in between Charlotte and Atlanta. Not very far from Clemson University.
You know what? I knew this was going to come up, right? If you know anything about Jonathan, he is a huge Clemson fan. So.
Yeah, I ended up graduating from Clemson. So,
okay.
But there's actually a story. When I was growing up, my dad was a Coca-Cola route driver, and he would work. This was his area, was the Clemson football games. And so he would sneak me into the games. This was back in the early 80s when security wasn't quite the same.
Yeah.
And at least one time I know of, back in I think it was 83 or 84, he came out for a break from his work and saw me actually down on the field during the game. And so that's a story I've told a lot of folks, but sort of makes Clemson home in a lot of ways because even from a young age.
Clemson's come a long way, man. Their football program.
Well, back then they were not as, I mean, they won the championship in 81, but there was a long drought. So,
elite team now for sure, man.
Well, thank you for saying that. A lot of people in Columbus.
We're still a little bitter from 2 games ago when they beat us.
I understand. But it's a good rivalry now. So.
It is, yeah.
But I grew up in, sort of a small town as compared to Columbus, Ohio, right? But probably about the size of Lancaster, I guess.
Okay.
And I grew up in a Christian home. My grandfather was a Southern Baptist minister, actually was in the mission field for a year. And I got to go with him for 3 weeks. It was in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Okay.
He was the pastor of the International Baptist Church there. And so at the end of his year-long tenure, I was there for the last 3 weeks. And it was really inspiring to me from a faith-based standpoint, because I can remember not
only... How old were you then?
I believe I was around 12.
Okay.
Because it was the same year of the Pan Am Games being in the United States, because we ended up having a situation where we got stuck in several countries in South America coming back, and that was the reason. But it was really interesting because his condo, you could see out the window to what they call in Brazil a favela. And that is like a slum area where it's basically box houses on this big hill, and it's thousands of people, and there's one place for running water, right? And you imagine a city, Rio de Janeiro being a city of around 10, 11 million people, so it's not a small place.
Wow.
And we were only blocks away from Copacabana Beach, which is a world-renowned beach in Rio, Brazil. So, and believe me, coming from Anderson, South Carolina at 12 years old, to a city that size was really inspiring. I mean, just to see my grandfather ministering to these folks. It was English-speaking church, but it had participants from all over the world. So people that were there for multiple reasons, whether it be job or whatever, that spoke English would come to this church. And it was a small church, but it was really, really neat. And being in a city that was based on Catholicism, there was a real learning experience for me, because he'd spent 3 weeks taking me around the city, seeing all these older churches. I grew up playing soccer, and I got to see where really soccer is done right.
Yeah, right. It's a lifestyle there.
Right, exactly. And you could see little clubs going down the street where kids were playing on dirt, right? I mean, just a whole nother level. All time of day or night, they're out there playing soccer. But then, when I wasn't down there in Rio, I would go to my grandfather's church. It was in Fountain Inn, South Carolina, which is in Greenville County, right there in the upstate. It was First Baptist Church, and I would stand with him at the exit as people would leave, because sort of like in any church, the pastor stands at the exit and says hello to everybody leaving. And as a young kid, I would stand there with him and shake hands with every single person and talk to people whenever I was there in town. And I remember him using me as part of the message on some Sundays, and really was inspired by, his faith and my grandmother's faith. And I can't explain to people. Sometimes, I know a friend of mine asked me one time, what it was like being the grandson of a pastor like that. And it was interesting because, I had other grandparents that were faith-based. And so, not to diminish anybody, but when I would walk into their home, you could feel the presence of God.
Wow.
It's something that's indescribable.
Yeah.
And
definitely impacted you.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. It was always front of mind, right? And so he actually baptized me.
Okay.
And, I grew up thinking I wanted to be a doctor, and ended up going into law enforcement, actually. Graduated from Clemson with a degree in sociology, with an emphasis in criminal justice. And, wow, that was because my parents were thinking, well, law enforcement's not, a well-paying profession, and it's pretty dangerous. And I said, oh, no, it's not a big deal. And I actually loved that job. That was probably the most fun job. It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
But
what was about law enforcement that drew you to it?
Well, I don't know exactly. I mean, my uncle was a cop as a highway patrolman, and I just really was inspired by helping other people. Yeah. By being there when they were at their worst. I'd been in EMS for a little bit of time, and I spent like 5 years doing that. And I remember having the police officers there at calls and this sort of thing. And so, I started out trying to figure out what I wanted to do, both in terms of being in an actual paid EMS system at like 18 years old. And even before that, I was in an Explorer program at 14, riding along with police officers on their shift for, up until the time when I was old enough to actually go to the academy myself. So that's what really got me thinking this would be a cool job. Like, you get to be out in the community, you're not sitting in an office all day, you're helping people, Now, I did see the danger in it, obviously, but when we're younger, right, we don't think anything's going to happen to us.
Yeah, never. Wow. Now, tell me a little bit more about your parents. What kind of people were your parents?
So my parents are both well-grounded in faith. I mean, my mom actually lives with us now. I brought her up here with some health issues from South Carolina.
I met her before,
Certainly. My dad is a barber. Before he was a Coke route driver, as I mentioned. Eventually, my whole family, my grandfather on that side, all of his brothers are barbers, and so he eventually got into the barbering business himself, now has his own shop. But he has certainly been a huge influence on my life, just like my mom. My mom was a school teacher, and so my mom was always telling me, get good grades and teaching me to read early and all those sorts of things. My dad was teaching me, not only was he teaching me a hard work ethic, but I think one of the things he always instilled in me was the ordinary people of the world are the ones that make the world. And don't think that just because somebody's rich or they have some high title that they're any better than any of the ordinary folks.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's something I've always sort of kept in the back of my mind and tried to think about, regardless of what I achieve or what God allows me to do, to think about the everyday folks that build a church, that build the folks that do all the things that we take for granted sometimes are the ones that are probably the most special in a society, right? So,
wow, they hold it together for sure, man. Build it. Now, do you have any brothers or sisters?
Oh, yeah. I have one brother. He's about 8 years younger than I am.
What was that relationship like?
Yeah, that was interesting because being 8 years,
that's a big gap.
It was quite interesting. Plus, he's very different than I am. I was always sort of the athletic type. I was in soccer and all the different sports, and he wasn't as interested in sports and that sort of thing. Actually, that's what I was thinking when my parents told me that he was going to be born, was I'll have somebody to throw football with and throw baseball, and he to this day has not thrown football with me or baseball.
What's your guys' relationship like now? Easy?
Yeah, we're not as close because we're not real close together, right?
Okay,
I mean, he lives in South Carolina and has his own sort of trajectory in life. I mean, I see him when we go down there, but we do stay in touch.
Okay.
But probably not as close as we should be.
Oh, hey. So let's follow this out, right? So you graduate high school, and you head to the police academy. Is that right?
Well, while I was working on my degree, I actually went to the first. I actually started at a hospital as a security officer, and in South Carolina, you actually get arrest authority and all this sort of thing.
Okay.
Then I went to a police agency. In South Carolina, you have to be hired by a police agency before you can go to the academy.
Okay.
They sent me to the academy, and then Clemson University actually picked me up while I was studying there and hired me full-time as a law enforcement officer.
Wow, on the university.
Right.
You got a lot of ties there, man.
Exactly. I worked there. I mean, I've seen all the insides of Clemson University.
I'm beginning to understand your loyalty
exactly.
to Clemson, man.
But then after Clemson, I said, I've got my degree. I want to be in like a larger agency where I can, specialize in something. So I went to Anderson, which was the one where I had been the explorer, and I knew people there and all that sort of thing. Real quickly got into narcotics and vice investigations, which was probably the most enjoyable part of my career. But it was one of those 90-hour-a-week kind of jobs. It never shuts off.
Yeah.
And if you know me at all, that's well inclined for my sort of personality, but not so inclined for a family.
Yeah.
And I had 2 small boys, in that period of time. So
yeah. Can we talk about that relationship? What'd that look like? Family.
Yeah. So my first wife and I got married in, I believe it was 99. It was the same year that we lost twins. They were born a little bit early. At that time, 23 weeks was too early. And that pretty much, kind of rocked me from the very beginning. Yeah. I think rocked our relationship, too. I tell people as a joke sometimes, because of that situation, I remember that on 9/11/2001 was our first marriage counseling appointment. And it was at like 9 o'clock.
Okay.
Right when all the stuff was happening. And, I look back on it and I think, part of that whole, we're now divorced, right?
Yep,
and so I believe that sort of led to or sort of started the beginning of the end, just because that's a terrible thing for a family to go through. Mm-hmm. I can tell you from firsthand experience, because different people grieve differently. Yeah. Men sort of don't want to talk about it, and sometimes women, they need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so it's real easy for, I think, a couple to grow apart through that sort of trauma.
Yeah.
And
what did you learn through that? Through the divorce and all that? That's difficult, man. Gut-wrenching.
Yeah, I actually, she had some problems in 2008 around there. And we actually moved up here in 2010, and we went through a nasty divorce that next year. I ended up with full custody of the kids through that process.
2 boys, right? Twins.
Well, no, they weren't twins. They're about 18 months apart.
Okay.
It's interesting how God works. The twins didn't make it, but we had 2 boys by the grace of God that have turned out healthy. The oldest one's now 23. He was actually premature as well, and spent, I think, 17 days in the NICU. Wow. So we had sort of done that with the first 2, and then it was scary with the second one. But with a divorce, it's not an easy thing. It's for anybody. I don't care what the situation is. It's a gut-wrenching thing, and but I will say, through all of that, there were a lot of allegations and all this sort of thing. I remember going to and sitting down with a pastor at the church I was at the time, and I kept saying, I've got this career that I've built, and she's trying to tear this down. Mm-hmm. And I remember his words like it was yesterday. He said, well, that's a career God helped you build or build for you or put you in, right? And it really humbled me at the time, because here I am thinking, I'm the one that's done all this.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And I really spent a lot of time with the boys, with getting in the Word, with really spending time thinking about my relationship with God. And, they say with terrible things, you get closer to God than you ever would have otherwise.
Yeah.
And that's no consolation prize because the thing you go through is probably terrible, right?
Yeah.
But I firmly believe that. I mean, it's certainly an opportunity to experience God if you let Him. Do things that you may not have thought possible. And through all of that, I remember people coming up to me that saw me during that whole, year or 2 year period, and they would say, I know what you went through, and I can't imagine how I would have done that. I don't understand how you did it. And so I've heard people say that in church, where, if you can keep your eyes on God, you can get through some of the toughest things that the world can throw at you. But I feel like I've at least experienced some of that. I'm certainly not where I ought to be. We're all kind of on a journey toward, being like Jesus as much as we can. So I'm not trying to say I'm, perfect by any stretch, but I really do feel like I've experienced that to some degree.
That's awesome. What was it like then? So you had full custody of your boys. And how old were they at the time?
Let's see. They would have been around 10. Yeah. 10, 11.
What was that like being a single dad? Everything else you got, your career's rolling, and now you got these two boys that are under your care by yourself. What was that like?
Yeah, that was pretty tough too. They were almost teenagers, so as they say, that can be a challenge, right? One of my boys actually was diagnosed with autism when he was about 13. So we didn't know this at the time, but a lot of the behaviors and things that we were seeing, we actually it made more sense having that diagnosis. And it was tough though, because you've got this sort of single parenting thing going on. I mean, they were going to their mother on, every other weekend and that sort of thing, but it was certainly on me to figure this out, right? And because we had moved, 9.5 hours from where any other family were, I was pretty much on my own. Wow. Now, I will say that my family, even from South Carolina, would come up and do stuff, and I would take them down there. I've probably made that trip between South Carolina and Ohio 100, probably more than 100 times, and they've probably made it a lot of times. But, it's one of those things where I tried to stay in the Word of God like every day. I actually started doing the SOAP method during that period of time and just laid it out. I would write, I would type, and I still have all of those like daily devotionals going through all that sort of traumatic thing.
For those listening, so SOAP, scripture, observation, application, and prayer.
Exactly.
Yeah, you write that.
And I would type out the entire prayer, praying certainly for the boys, praying for myself and all of the situation, just the mere fact of trying to get them to school, pick them up from school, take them to activities. I mean, I certainly am not a single mother because I know that there's a lot of single mothers out there, but being a single parent is a very difficult thing to do. I mean, and I only experienced that for a short period of time. Because within a couple of years, I met my wife now, who is certainly a blessing. But then there's also sort of the challenge of a blended family, which can be maybe even more traumatic in some ways, right?
Yeah, you definitely want to get to that. So let's continue to move. Right, walk through divorce. Man, you're raising two boys, and career still doing well. Yeah,
I mean, there for a period, it was kind of rocky because of the allegations and that sort of thing, but came through that really in a good spot. I mean, actually much better than I had thought I would be, which is kind of interesting, But, there was a lot of anxiety at the time because you can't see the forest for the trees, right? Always, when you're in the fire and like you can actually feel yourself burning with some of the pain and things going on, it's hard to see that God's trying to help you or he's putting things in place that maybe you didn't even know about.
Let me ask this, man, Jonathan, how do you hold on to your faith in the midst of trials like that? When it feels like your world is crashing down, a lot of people lend to blaming God. You did this to me, or, there's free will, right? And people make decisions. Sometimes people closest to us make bad ones. But how did you hold on to your faith through that difficult time?
Well, I think I actually had experienced the other end of it after the death of the twins, right? So I did blame God for a long time. And I actually remember being in a church one time where the pastor started talking about forgiving God.
Wow.
And I broke into tears because a lot of what I had done was say, how could God put me in a position? Because if you know more about the thing with the twins, when they were born, the doctor came to me because my ex-wife, she wasn't conscious at the time, and said, we can work on them, but we don't think they're viable. But we need you to make that call. And I for a long time, that really bothered me that God would put me in that position.
And you said viable. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they could have put them on a vent and they could have worked them up and all this sort of thing. But their thing was the chances of them, surviving are less than 5%. The chances of, you not being in the NICU for the next 2 years is really, really low. And so, I was taking the advice of the doctor, right? But at the same time, it's you making the decision.
Wow.
And, that was a tough one.
I can't imagine.
That's
your ex-wife wakes up.
Exactly. Right. And that's the thing that, I was sort of resentful of God for having put me in that situation. The thing that I learned, though, because I tell you, I spent a long time between, that would have been in March of 99. I spent many years thinking that alcohol and other things were the answer, right? Mm-hmm. And I found out that wasn't the answer. And so it led me to when this, sort of crisis came about, I made the intentional decision to turn to God and say, this is really the only thing I have. And I'm not talking about people, I had people in my family and that sort of thing, but, it was just such a devastating sort of blow to a lot of different things that I was kind of like, I have to turn to God in this situation, because otherwise I don't know what'll happen. Right.
What was that like, forgiving God? Because I'm sure there's people that are listening to this going, oh, probably when you said that, in their heart they felt something, right? Because I know a lot of people, there's some unforgiveness toward God. What would you tell someone who's listening to this podcast today who is wrestling with unforgiveness toward God?
Yeah, the biggest thing is, I think it probably has to be said and vocalized. One, it was for me to hear it, that's even a possibility.
Because was it something like you were conscious of, or was it just something subconsciously that you were wearing, or was a part of you holding this unforgiveness toward God?
Well, I think I felt like I was resentful toward God for having put me in the situation, but I didn't think about it in terms of I needed to forgive God. That was a new sort of lens to look at it. But I think now, looking back on it, it was actually God giving me the opportunity to think about it that way, which was a way, maybe one of the only ways for me to get out of that.
Yeah.
Right? Because you could wear that sort of thing for a long time.
People do.
Right.
Yeah.
And, sometimes it's I know men, they don't like going to counselors, right? I've been in the law enforcement culture where you see a lot of negative stuff, and people don't, men and women sometimes don't want to go to counselors. Mm-hmm. But this was kind of, I wasn't seeing a counselor at the time, but I was living with something, and I feel like it was God kind of reaching out and saying, hey, this is something you need to let go of.
Wow. And you did.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
But then it also offered me the opportunity, when something else came along, not to go back to the same problem I had before.
Yeah.
Maybe thinking about it differently and saying, I'm going to turn to God this time, may not have been possible if I hadn't have forgiven him that many years ago, right?
Yeah, that's good. That's great, man. So let's keep walking this out, right? You're, raising 2 boys, and what's happening now?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like, I'm a task-oriented individual, so it was just like we're, getting people to school, we're doing homework, we're struggling with, all the things that teenagers eventually deal with. And, my relationship with both of those boys is still good today. I can tell that, that's something that, like one of the things I did at several different points with the boys when their mother wasn't present or if there was something going on, is I would read the Bible to them, like openly. And I don't even know if they think about that today, but it was a way of me trying to say, we might be hurting, you are probably hurting in this, but let's focus here.
Yeah.
Because that's, and I don't know how I got that idea or where that came from necessarily. I remember my grandfather doing the same thing when I was younger, and maybe that's an influence, right? But, I think about that being something that really maybe helped me too, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And hopefully it helped them.
That's awesome, man. Well, you're giving them a great foundation. Well, let me ask this question. How'd you end up at C3?
So I started dating Christina.
Okay, I didn't know I was alluding there. I didn't know if you met her here or she brought you here or.
No, we actually met in an online dating site.
Okay.
And I don't know if anybody knows how those things work, but you fill out all these things and then it sort of matches you by percentage. Okay. And her match with me was the closest to 100 of anybody that was on there. It was like 99 point something, I forget.
Okay.
And so I kept saying, man, that's too close. Like,
right.
I'm just going to not look at it or whatever. And eventually I connected with her. And let me tell you, she changed my life more than anything else. So,
yeah. Now, I can't remember, was she already attending here or not?
I think she was.
Okay.
I was attending at another church because my grandfather, when I moved to Ohio, my grandfather had already passed away, but my grandmother was still alive. And I remember her sending me a list of approved churches in the Columbus area, and they were ones that were affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. Yeah. Okay. And so I felt sort of...
C3 was not on that list.
No, and, maybe not all the churches with the Southern Baptist Convention are the ones you should be, I don't know. I'm not making any judgment there, but that was just sort of my train of thought at the time. But then, as I started dating her, she came actually to the church I was at.
Okay.
For a little bit.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, why don't we go to this church I've been going to? And I said, well, that's fine. I'm fine with that. Yeah. And it was at the old church. This has been like almost 10 years ago now.
I was thinking, man, I know it's been a while. You guys have been here a long time.
We walked into the old church. I remember getting a Frisbee.
Yeah.
I know we stopped doing that for a period of time, but we're back at it now.
Bringing it back, man. Let's go.
But that was like my first experience. And I remember, it was just a different environment. Sure. It was certainly a great message from your,
I appreciate it, man.
Right there from the stage. Yeah. And I don't know, we just kind of both felt at home, a good youth group. Yeah. I thought that was important. And we started coming here and it's been C3 ever since.
Okay, man. Now, how long you guys been married?
We got married in 2014. She's going to get me if I don't remember. I know.
But we should have talked this before we turned these mics on, right?
The thing about it is, like with the pandemic, like I'm lost years. Oh, yeah. Like I don't remember exactly which year something is, right? But I'm pretty sure it was in June of 2014.
Okay.
Because we actually went to Las Vegas to get married.
Okay.
Because she said she had been remarried, or she was getting remarried just like I was, and it was like, we're not going to do the sort of traditional wedding.
Let's elope.
Yeah, we said we're going to go to Las Vegas, as cliche as that might be. Okay. Her mom actually flew out there from North Dakota, but we live streamed it. it was interesting because the pastor was like a traditional pastor. He's like,
Yeah.
we'll do whatever kind you want. But yeah, that I think it was June of 2014. I was positive.
Okay.
Because we did a 5-year visit out to Vegas just to kind of.
Yeah.
We're
that's
not
cool.
quite to the 10-year. So.
Okay. Well, let's talk this. So you guys come as a blended family. So
Right.
talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so this is one of the things I feel like I need to like write a book or something.
Yeah.
Because it's like I don't know if it's the best kept secret about just families or what, but a lot of families are blended, and that's okay. Like, I mean, I think it's a good thing in many cases, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times, like the parents of the other kids, I say the other kids, maybe that seems negative. I'm not trying to be negative. It's just like as a parent, a step parent, maybe that's
Yeah.
the best way to
Okay.
describe it. It's really hard because,
She had a son.
right,
Yeah.
she had a son. He
And
was
you have two.
only like 4 when we started dating. So, I mean, and he has a father that he sees every week and that sort of
Okay,
thing. But it's just a different thing, like, and I see it happening on kind of both sides. Like your kid, you don't think does anything wrong, and the other kid always does something wrong, right?
This is good, man. Yes.
It's exactly.
Every blended family parent's shaking their head right now.
I mean, I don't know how to describe it any other way, right?
It's a
I mean,
natural thing.
you almost give your own kids this benefit of the doubt. Like you could watch them do something and say, "Not my kid," but then the other one is like, they can't do anything right, and you feel you're almost too critical, right? And so you really have to guard against that. And I remember we, at some points we would have one or more of the boys in some kind of counseling thing just for different reasons. And I remember one of the counselors just talking about how your value to that kid is something they may not realize for 20 or 30 years.
Wow.
Like, you're not going to get this sort of immediate reaction for you pouring into them because that's just not how this works. It might be a year it takes. It might be 15 years. You don't know. Or it might not be ever. But your job is to pour into them just like they're yours.
It's good.
And that's kind of the way I tried to do it. I mean, obviously, as a parent, we fail our own kids sometimes,
Sure,
right? I mean,
sure.
and so, but that's kind of the way I've, and then the other thing too is like the dealing with the exes can be difficult because the one parent's hearing something about the other one's ex and they have to guard against reacting to that because the kids can hear it.
That's good.
And it really doesn't matter where they're at in the house. Like they have super hearing when it comes to stuff like that.
Yep.
And so that's another thing. Like if somebody, even if it's the child saying something about his own dad, you can't react. Like you can't be like, yeah, I agree, because what's going to happen, I guess in my view, what's going to happen is you're going to feed this idea in him that you think less of that other parent.
Wow.
And that's just a dangerous place to be in. I mean, irregardless of whether, like we can all debate whether or not it's true or not,
Sure,
right?
sure.
But, you might be harming the kid more than you're harming the other parent.
Yeah.
And that's the worry, right?
Yeah.
But, if you think of like my stepson now, he's 14. I took him last week for his first flight lesson.
Oh, cool,
we
man.
talk all the time about what college to go to and that sort of thing. I mean, he's a really good kid. I mean, he's comes to church. I think he even works in the cafe and
cool.
loves doing it. And I kid him a lot, but I do much worse kidding to mine. So my biological ones, I guess. But the other thing I've thought about too is that like we adopted a child.
Yeah.
And
So tell us about that.
so Christina is a gifted person, right? So let me just say this. Like I've been a parent for my entire adult life, I think. But she is like got the patience of Job and was built to
She's
help
an
children.
amazing lady. I got to admit, she's an amazing lady.
She is
Loved around here for sure.
right. A special ed teacher, first and second grade, inner city. I mean,
One of the most positive ladies I've ever met.
oh, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, and at one point she was like, I want to have other children, and it wasn't going to be possible for us. And, the idea of, well, maybe we could be foster parents. And I was thinking, wow, that's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a big step.
I don't know how we can do that. Like, and at one point I was like, if I get in the way of this, I'm not going to allow her to bless some child in the way I know that God wants her to. That's really what it came down to.
Okay.
And so we went and got our fostering license. We said we'd take basically any child. I mean, we wanted a child that, was pretty close to birth because we wanted to keep them. Like, that was our idea, was we were going to foster them and then adopt them, hopefully. And I tell you, we got it really, really easy. I mean, we were blessed from the very beginning. So we take the class, there's all these other parents in there, and they're dealing with, they already, maybe had kids in the home because they're a kinship, even though, and they're still working on their license or whatever. And they're dealing with, teenage kids that have been through stuff that you can't even imagine. I mean, it's just, and the behaviors and all that sort of thing. The classes, when they start talking about, for instance, some of the things that these kids have gone through, I mean, it really breaks your heart.
Oh, I can't imagine.
I mean, because, when I was going through my own struggle with the twins, I remember reading this book called The Shack. I don't know, you've probably heard of it.
Yeah. The movie's out too, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I read the book way before the movie, obviously. And I felt like the book was better. But anyway, it's interesting how he talks about in that book, one of the most profound lines in there is that how can you justify killing my daughter in that situation? If you know anything about the book, the daughter was murdered and all this. And he's talking to God, and God turns around and says, I didn't justify it. I redeemed it. And that really struck me. But then later on in the book, he's talking about how broken people break other people.
Yeah, hurt people.
Right. And that's exactly what you see with foster kids. Not to get off top, but, these broken people are breaking other people, and then they're breaking, I mean, it's just a vicious cycle of the world, right? Well, we ended up getting our license while Christina was up at Heartland Conference Center. We had our license. She's up there at the conference center because she does the family camp with the kids every year.
Okay.
And she gets a call, even though the reception's not all that great up there, about a placement. And I don't know if you know much about how these placements go, but just in the city of Columbus, they place 1,300 kids in a very short period of time. I forget exactly what it was. But they come out with the placements, they call people that are eligible, and then for whatever reason, it may not actually work out, right? Because there's a kinship found or some other variable comes into play. Well, we had 2 of those while she was at Heartland Conference Center. Well, then we get back, I think it's on Friday of that week, and we get a call about a child that's in the NICU that had just been born the week prior. And we were like, yeah, we'll take him. Sight unseen. We're not, it wasn't we prayed about it. I mean, we'd already been praying about it, And we go to Mount Carmel East, and he's in his own private room because he had a lot of breathing problems.
Okay.
And, I mean, we fell in love from the very beginning. So we stayed essentially in the NICU for about 3 days, back and forth kind of thing. And we actually brought him home from the hospital.
Wow.
His biological mother left from there, never named him, just left, against medical advice. And, he was in the custody of Franklin County Children's Services, but they placed him with us as the foster parent. So we bring him home. We go through all the process, because in the case of being a foster parent, you have to allow the child to visit with the biological parents. There's this because there's this sort of predisposition to unification, from the court and that sort of thing, which is, I mean, I guess it's a noble thing in some situations. But the thing was, they never could find her. Like, they never actually found her over a 1.5 year period of time trying. And so eventually the court, did what they need to do, and they made him eligible for us to adopt him. So we did. I mean, we've embraced him completely. Yeah. And I tell you what, I told you at the beginning of this, it was like I couldn't get in the way of her blessing this child, but I firmly believe that he blesses us much more than we do him.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it has been a true joy.
A little bundle of energy, man.
Well, he is, and I'm getting old, and you can tell because it is like every day. Yeah. But, the other thing that's interesting is, like my 2 kids, they played sports, but they didn't really, just really go all in on sports, as Dabo says. But this child, I've never seen anything like it. Like every sport, he has not met a sport he doesn't like. Yeah. He's soccer,
an athlete, man. Competitor,
basketball.
And how old is he right now?
He's a little over 4 years old. Yeah. And at almost 3, I could pitch the ball to him and he would hit a baseball out of the air.
Yeah.
And I mean, just all day long. I mean, it's been a joy to watch.
I drove by your house the other day. I saw you in your tractor. And I saw him following behind in his little John Deere tractor, whatever it was. I got a big kick out of that, man. He was
yeah, he loves that. And he'll put the sticks in his trailer and take them back to the burn pile. It's been pretty awesome to watch him.
That's awesome, man. That is awesome. Well, tell me about this. You're part of a board, Adam H. Board. Maybe just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in 2015, I was appointed by the commissioners, the Fairfield County Commissioners, to be on the Alcohol, Drug Abuse, and Mental Health Board, Fairfield County. And so many counties in the state have this type of board. Some of them are combined, like with multiple counties. Fairfield has their own, just like Franklin does, and there's a couple, obviously, many others in the counties. And they don't provide services, but they provide funding to the nonprofits, and in some cases for-profits that do provide service. And the service I'm talking about are mental health, any sort of mental health, any sort of addiction recovery services. So, like in the case of Fairfield County, we fund not only the service, but also we fund other things like the 211 service in Fairfield County. People can call and find out information about things they need. The other thing we fund is a navigator, and that's one thing I've wanted to try to get the word out about, because let's say that, you have a family member that's experiencing addiction, and that's a crisis situation, or maybe it's not even a crisis. You can call the navigator and explain the situation, and they will get you to the right agency that provides the service that person needs.
How would somebody find a navigator if they were looking for that?
So we can provide the phone number. I don't have it right here in front of me, but there's actually a phone number you call, and most of the time she answers the phone. But if not, you can leave a message. Now, we also have a thing where we fund what's called a mobile crisis unit. So if somebody's in crisis, they'll actually come to the place where they're at and evaluate them and see if they need to be admitted or what the case might be. So I say sometimes, because when I got on the board, I was on the public relations committee, like this is the best kept secret in Fairfield County.
Yeah, man, sounds like
because, you think about the opioid epidemic, you think about all the anxiety and mental health stuff that people are experiencing. And there's services right here in Fairfield County. There's agencies that this is what they do. And a lot of people, I feel like, it's like, well, who do I call? Or, do I go to, like, Diley Ridge? Or do I go to Ohio Health in Pickerington? Or what do I do? And those are certainly viable options. I mean, if somebody was in crisis, they should call 911. I mean, that's the sort of first-line thing to do. Yeah. But this navigator can also help somebody find the actual service for their particular need. And based on, and it's not a situation where if somebody has insurance, a health insurance, for instance, that they automatically don't qualify, right? And so it's an important thing to think about calling and seeing, what is the situation for that particular individual. We know that, like, for instance, people that are drug addicted, they may not be able to keep their job because of the situation that they're in, and then they might be eligible for other types of insurance that the government provides. So just because somebody doesn't have insurance or does have a job shouldn't prevent somebody from calling Adam H. and seeing what they can do.
Oh, that's great. That's like you said, best kept secret. That's good. Well, I know we're coming to the end here, and we like to close with kind of a 4-question lightning round. Okay? And so here's the first question for you. Who is a hero in your life and why?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this. I think probably the best hero is going to have to be Jesus, because that's where I want to keep my focus. I mean, I could say it's a professional athlete, or I could say, but often human beings let us down, even from their best intentions, right?
That's good.
I mean,
very good. Let me hit you with this next one. What is something from your history that you haven't shared yet? Again, it could be a passion, could be someplace you've been, something you've done, something, oh yeah, this is something pretty cool from my history, or this is something I really enjoy, or...
Yeah, I mean, most people don't know what I do for a living.
Yeah, okay.
And, I mean, I am the Dean of the College of Health and Public Administration at Franklin University.
Oh, okay.
And I have a PhD around criminal justice. So, I mean, I guess that's probably something that I'm pretty proud of. But I want to go back to the point that God put me in that position.
Yeah.
God made that happen. It certainly wasn't me. So
that's awesome. Cool. How about this one? What is a heartache, something that breaks your heart?
I'd probably say the foster kids, and also the statistics around foster kids that end up aging out are much more likely to end up in prison, without a job, all these sorts of things. So that if there's anything that breaks my heart, it's, foster kids and the things that they go through. Yeah. And we probably have a lot of kids in our congregation that were foster kids and have been successful. So it's not about everybody.
Yeah.
But it breaks my heart for the ones that don't end up successful.
No, that's good. And finally, this last one, what is hope? What is something that brings you hope? What are you hopeful for?
I'm hopeful for us as a church to fulfill the mission that I think you've laid out, that all of Columbus would know Jesus. I mean, I'm hopeful that that's the kind of thing that would change people's attitudes and lives and, really make a difference. That's probably the biggest thing I'm hopeful for.
That's good. Well, Jonathan, I appreciate you being a part of the C3 podcast. I appreciate you sharing your story, and I'm sure there's going to be quite a few people that are going to resonate with that. And so, of course, many of them may find you on a Sunday morning just to shake your hand and go, okay. And the cool thing is now they'll be able to see you. Before it was just a voice, but now they're with the video option with this too. So I just want to say again, man, thanks so much for coming in.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And so with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the C3 podcast, and we hope to see you again right back here next week. Well,
thanks for joining us on the C3 podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Have a great day, and we'll see you on our next episode of the C3 podcast.